there, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, the TV show from the BBC from the 1980s that is one of the highlights of the sitcom format. It really is the great look at politics in television. They've tried it after that. I mean, they've tried it with West Wing, which is just sentimental nonsense. And you've got the thick of it in Veep, and Mando and Lucci, which is very influenced by this series. And they're good. I don't think they're quite as good as Yes Minister. Now, I'm not going to cover the reboot that Anthony G and Jonathan Lynn did in 2010 with new actors, because some of the actors had died from when they did Yes Minister. That didn't work because the actors they had never quite nailed the part, and also because I think we'd moved away from the way some of the humour worked and the way the social fabric of the country worked now was different from the 70s and 80s with some of the jokes. And I think it needed a change of certain kind of jokes to make the same points we're trying to make. So I think it was a case of it was stuck in the past to a degree, but mainly it was just the surface stuff that needed adjustment, and the actors never quite nailed those parts either, and it just never quite worked. It's not that you can't have new actors in these parts. I think you could remake it with new actors, and if you got the right actors, it'd be great. Again, I think you said the wrong actors for that reboot, really. But it doesn't matter ultimately, because something done perfect, like Yes Minister, it's always worth rewatching. Now, Yes Minister started in 1980, so the early episodes do look aged quite a bit just because of they were shot in video. Videos degraded slightly over time. They're being remastered and stuff as well as they can be. So the sound's fine, the visual's fine. You can watch them. They're not going to look great. They're not 1080p level or anything. But the actual drama's so good that it doesn't matter ultimately, because what they're doing is so good that the picture quality doesn't really matter. It's a big downside of actually just shooting on video, is that a lot of old films can get brought back, even though they were shot years and years ago in the 1930s. Because they're shot in film, they can be remastered a lot easier than video is, because video is a much cheaper, simpler system that is based on little dots on a screen, and if you have a bigger and bigger screen, dots become more obvious. So it's just an old technology that you can see its limits in the modern world. But that doesn't matter ultimately, because the actual drama is so good and the comedy is so good. So basically, I've watched Yes Minister for years, repeatedly. Like, it's one of my comfort, watches. It's just so good. I haven't watched it for a while because I'd overdone it, so I stopped for a while, and I recently rebought them on streaming, on Amazon streaming. Even though I've got the DVDs, it's just easier to have them on that as well, just for access. But I've still got the old DVDs too. I'm keeping them just in case. It gave me an excuse to rewatch them, like I need an excuse. So I just watched them. I had been watching them in the past in random order for a while, mainly because I knew the episodes when they came, so I just would randomly watch episodes of whatever ones I felt like watching. Which obviously means when you do that, you watch your favourites more, and the ones you didn't like as much, you watch a lot less. But doing a rewatch all the way through, like watching it in order, brings out the fact that even the the episodes I didn't like as much are actually really strong episodes. And the episodes I thought were really good are amazingly good. It's just that the more you watch them, the more you see of them, the more nuanced it becomes. And one of the things that becomes always as you watch them as you're older is how much funnier and more subversive they are. Because when you watch them as a younger person, you're going to be a bit on Jim Hacker's side for going against the government. Because he's the minister trying to get stuff put through. So you're going to accept that he's a bit of an idiot sometimes, but you're still going to be roughly on his side a little bit more than Sir Humphrey. And as you get older, you realise just how satirical they are towards Hacker and his ideals, and how craven he actually is. And so it becomes a much more balanced drama amidst the comedy the older you get, because you start to realise just the depths of how wrong Hacker is a lot of the time. And you also see the depths of how wrong Sir Humphrey is a lot of the time as well, even more than you would before. So it becomes a much more balanced thing as you get older. And you start to see that they're both completely out of it. Just like most politicians and civil servants are completely out of it in lots of ways. So it's a very balanced thing where you can criticise both parties and both establishments. Now the good thing with this how it was written was it was written by a left winger and a right winger. Anthony J was to the right and Jonathon Lynn to the left. So there was a balance, because neither side was going to let the other one do a political broadcast for their side. So it allowed them to be pretty brutal with both sides. And that's really a lot better for a comedy when both sides can get hammered. And any political side can get hammered. And it also allows them to have a point of view of, no matter who's in government, it doesn't change that much, really, ultimately. I mean, if you're in Britain, Britain's a fairly centrist country. So if Labour are in, they're not going to go as far as the unions would want. If you have the Tories in, they're not going to be allowed to go as far as some of their extremists want. As you've seen just now with Liz Truss try to go extreme right wing, and everyone's saying, nope, we don't want that. So, no matter how ideological they may feel they are as they go into office and make these promises, the state, their own party, the civil service, are not going to let them go crazy on either direction. They're just not. They're going to find ways to stop them. And that's what this show's all about. It's how do you find ways to stop the ministers from doing the things they shouldn't be doing, and how do you stop the civil service from being all-controlling and slowing things to a stop in ways that hurt the country. That's the dynamic of the show. So sometimes Humphrey has to win, and sometimes Hacker has to win. More often than not, it's Humphrey wins. But it's about how society gets stalled by this, but the necessity for it, because the politicians can be people who don't think things through as closely as they maybe should have. So you have three characters. You have Jim Hacker, who's the minister, who, as we start the show, has got our government post for the first time. And you've seen his rise through the political system throughout the show, from minister to prime minister. Minister is basically, the ministers are the people who are in charge of different departments in the British government. So you have a minister for foreign affairs, you have a minister for defence, you have a minister for education, all these minister for employment, you have stuff like that, and they'll convene as a cabinet with the prime minister, and they each tell him how to run the department. And that's what the thing's about, this show's about, is like, how do they all run a department, how does that affect the country? And how does the civil service want to stop them from running a department? And the show really is about Hacker trying to find his way around the civil service, and failing early on a lot. I mean, the first 3 or 4 episodes are basically Hacker getting squashed again and again by Sir Humphrey, who has worked out, has read up in all his promises, all the promises that the government made as they were up for election, now in office, about put in place. So Humphrey knows what Hacker wants. Hacker doesn't know what Humphrey wants, so Hacker's completely unsure. And he doesn't realise his enemies actually worked out how to stall him straight away, because that's his job, is to stall the minister. You've also got Bernard, who's the principal private secretary for Jim Hacker, which means he's the civil servant who works with Hacker all the time, but he also has to report to Sir Humphrey, who's the head of the department for the civil service. And they're in charge of a department that made up the show called the Department for Administrative Affairs, which is just an administration department. And it's about how the civil service wants to increase administration, increase the power for administration, how the government wants to always decrease it, because the more civil servants are in there, the more power the civil service has. And the less civil servants there are, the more power the ministers have, because of the less people to fight. Unfortunately, the ministers need the civil servants to actually enact their actions, otherwise they won't get done. But the civil service wants to make sure they don't actually enact things that are going to cause havoc. Because, as Humphrey points out, if you're a civil servant, the people you work with change a lot. Ministers get fired from their positions. Ministers move on. Governments are elected and unelected. So you've got left wing, right wing, left wing, right wing. So you're dealing with them all the time. They're switching. And they've all got their points of view across of what will work for the country. So they can be pro-nuclear war, or pro-nuclear weapons, anti-nuclear weapons. They can be the whole range of economic policies, a whole range of administration policies that will change back and forward depending who's in government. And the civil service trying to avoid ping-pong back and forth all the time. Because one, they know that a lot of these policies will not work. That they're stupid and they're just done to get some attention. And even if they do work, that means it will lessen the civil service's defence against them. If they can do stuff that works, it means they might end up doing stuff that won't work. Because they've got their confidence up. So the civil service wants to kill them as soon as they arrive and kill their confidence as soon as they arrive, so they're good little ministers who do what they're told. And it's the battle between Hacker and Sir Humphrey Appleby. One side wanting to change everything, one side wanting to keep everything the same. And the reality is, you need a bit of both for any government to work. And it's the battles between them to get things changed or to keep things the same. So you actually, it's one of the strengths of shows, you can see both points of view. You can see the point of view of Sir Humphrey, even though he goes too far, as like, I'm trying to avoid any change because I don't want to flip back and forth all the time. And you can see Hacker wanting to change things to make things more efficient. But unfortunately, Hacker doesn't know how to make things more efficient, which is part of the joke of the show, as he collapses, he's craven. A lot of his ideas are not well thought out. But Sir Humphrey's also a character who likes things in control all the time, to the detriment of the country. Because sometimes he needs to be told to do things that he doesn't want to do that actually will help everybody. And he will let things fall to a standstill all the time. And he will make deals with people who are maybe not the greatest deals. So he's flawed as well. Both sides are flawed. So it's a war between them. So within that structure, you have episodes about smoking, you have episodes about, how to get a report buried if it goes against your department, how to deal with Europe, how to deal with cabinet colleagues briefing against you, how to deal with potential promotions within Europe, how to deal with Europe itself. And there's always a thing with Brexit now, and this show shows these things have been happening for decades. It's the same problems for decades. It's the same tensions for decades. We've always the same problems. Which is what the writers realised when they looked at the papers from when they were writing it to papers writing it 30 years ago. It's like, still the same problems. You've got problems with Israel, you've got problems with Germany, you've got problems with France, problems with America, and them thinking they've always got all the power. You have problems with what to buy, what not to buy. You have problems with your constituency. You have problems with areas that are deprived, which are like they could change party any minute, any election. You have to try and keep them happy. So it's all about the grind of politics. The House of Lords, the House of Commons, and their differences. And you've just got a lot of government administration and how so much of this political stuff goes through the administration side, and how that's how a lot of work is done, and that's how you have to control it, and how you either control it or don't control it. And so Humphrey's always figuring out ways to avoid letting Hacker actually get control of his own government and his own ministry. And of course, the minister's scared of the Prime Minister firing him at all times. He's scared of the Chief Whip terrorising him. He's scared of his own cabinet colleagues backstabbing him. And of course, Humphrey always works on that. And so Humphrey's always working on different things to keep him motivated. So Humphrey's always tied to the banks, because the civil service knows the banks are important to finance all the stuff they want to do to keep the country going. And you don't want to tell the ministers half that stuff, because the ministers will panic or have a moral outrage with something. And it's just so funny, because it's all about the different levels of corruption. So everyone's corrupt, even Hacker, who starts off thinking he's above all the corruption, and he used to write, as he used to be a journalist writing for a reform magazine, and it showed you how quickly he can change as soon as he's in government and realise how it works and how he's compromised. And as the writers more or less say in interviews around it, they say basically Hacker thinks he knows how to do stuff, but he's never actually done real work, so he doesn't really know how things work in real life either, which is the case of a lot of ministers who go into government. They were trained in universities, and they worked in universities and in media, but they don't actually have any practical experience about how things actually work, which is why so many of their ideas fail completely, because they have no reference. They're referencing other people telling them about it, but they don't know the pros and cons of those things. So it's all about all that stuff, all within a really funny comedy, because you've got three characters who always play off each other. So you get Hacker and Humphrey, who are the opposition of each other. Civil service versus the minister. The minister's always the cowering one who's always terrified of bad headlines. The civil servant's the one who's always much more confident, until we find out some of his mistakes, and he has to make deals with the minister to avoid them coming out. Then you have Bernard, who's the one that's floating between principal private secretary, and he's the one who gets a lot of speeches made to him from both sides, finding out what they're going to do, because he likes the minister and he's still quite new in the job. So he's been given this sort of minister that's new, so he comes across as fairly new as a civil servant for this position. And so he sympathises with the minister's frustration sometimes at how things are done, but he also knows he has to work with Humphrey, and he can't annoy him. And he's also asking Humphrey, how does these things work? And Humphrey explains to them sometimes the actual logic behind why they're doing something. That it's not just been malicious. That sometimes it is malicious, sometimes there's an actual reason for what's going on. And sometimes, the best times in the show, when the show's really peaking, is it's ambiguous whether someone's manipulating someone for their own good or for actual reasons. But a lot of times it's for personal reasons as well as party reasons or civil service reasons. And there's always areas of grey whenever, and Bernard's trying to work at the areas of grey. And as the show goes on, the minister becomes much more meshed in the system. And you see him become much more corrupted by the system, even though he doesn't realise it. He still thinks he's a nice guy, the outsider, even though he's been compromised horribly. And Bernard's the one that's still needing to explain things to him to try and find out why they're doing certain things. So it's a show all about shades of grey. No one's all good and all bad, and everyone's got their areas, and everyone's lying a lot. And the reasons for doing everything's always up in the air. And some of the biggest jokes, the driest jokes about how Hacker's doing alright in his job. He's not doing great, he's just doing alright. And there's jokes about how appalled they are as things go wrong, and there's lots of very dry humour. I mean, the thing that you like it or love it, this show is, or even not like it, is how dry the humour is and how brutal the humour is. It may put you off, or it may think that's pretty funny, or it may be the thing that makes you love it, which is, for me, the thing that makes me love it. The humour is so sharp. I mean, there's one line they say, they ask someone who's gone from the House of Commons to the House of Lords, what's the change? He says it's like going from the animals to the vegetables, which sums up the show, that kind of line. The show went 3 years as Yes Minister, and then they did a special where they promoted Hacker to become Prime Minister. And of course, it's because he's so easy to manipulate. That's why they want him as Prime Minister, because they actually want a Prime Minister who's not argumentative. Because the last one, from Yes Minister was argumentative and troublesome, so try and make someone and it was easy for them to control. And of course, Hacker has his own ideas and his own advisors that come in as well. So yes, Prime Minister is like taking this sort of guy who's not great at his job into the international sphere, talking about trade and nuclear weapons, talking about like the different deals, you know, like oil deals with the Saudis and lots of different corrupt practices going on in the system that they're very difficult to manoeuvre. You have different regimes taking over different countries. You'll get the Russians to deal with much more now. The Mexicans deal with much more now. How do you balance dealing against the Russians, dealing with Europe, dealing with Americans, trying to stay on their side? How do you vote on things about Israel? So it becomes much more politicised and much just darker, and all about the idea of how government goes to crawl even at the Prime Minister level. Like Hacker always terrified the Prime Minister because it could cost him his job. And then when he becomes Prime Minister, he realises this job is just as bad as his other job, if not worse, because he still doesn't have any control. He's still been manipulated to not do things he wants to do. He's still terrified of the papers. He's still manipulated out of doing things that might have helped because he's so weak-willed and ultimately not a good politician. I mean, this whole show is about people who are not good politicians, who think they're good politicians. You know, and it's all about how things are manipulated, how you think you're strong on a subject and how you can be manipulated out of that subject quite easily. It's all about peevages. How do you have to deal with issues like smoking, how to deal with issues like the new bishop of a certain area where you don't really know anything. It's like, oh, what's the difference between a traditionalist and a reformist? And it was like, well, one believes in God and one doesn't. You know, things like that. You have all these different areas he has to deal with, and he gets it all wrong. Because a comedy only works if someone's getting something wrong. And this show shows how people get things wrong all the time, how they panic, and how things just spiral insanely. And it's just out of compromise with both parties how a lot of stuff doesn't get out. All the absolute, you know, shit shows that they cause. So it's a really hilarious show. It's wonderful. I try not to quote much of the comedy. I've only quoted a few bits of jokes because I ruin it. The acting's terrific, so well delivered, and Paul Eddington as Hacker is so good because you're sympathetic towards him, even though he's a scumbag a lot of times. Even though he's so weak, so horribly weak in lots of things, so smug, so opinionated, but very human. So you're always on his side, which makes the satire better as you get older. You realise, I shouldn't be on his side. I'm on his side because of who's playing it. And that's what makes it funnier, is the fact that you're on his side when you shouldn't be. And it shows you how much you're tied to your human emotions, even this political system where you shouldn't be. And it shows you that's how politics works. As you fall for nonsense you shouldn't fall for all the time, and everyone's implicated in it. Nigel Hawthorne as Humphrey is amazing. He has all these massive speeches that are absolute nonsense half the time. It's double talk all the time, but you always see his point of view. And he really overacts. When he overacts, it's because the character's panicking. And it happens very few times. So when it happens, it really means something's gone really bad. But watching him figuring things out is a pleasure. You also have Derek Ford as Bernard, who's the middle ground between them, and he's very dry. A lot of time he gets the best jokes, because he's the one watching between them, watching what they're doing, and he can be very pedantic at times about certain things and leads to weird speeches that are hilarious and how weird they are. And they're just so well placed within the drama. Suddenly the drama goes way off base in a funny way, then comes back to the point. And some of those things were due to sometimes Anthony J explaining to Jonathon Lynn certain things, why certain things work. And Jonathon Lynn saying, that's a speech for the show, you know that, right? That's funny. And he would give them to Bernard and let him be pedantic and weird. And there'd be some weird explanations of stuff that were hilarious. There's a whole line about Greeks this fear of Greeks bearing gifts and how it's inaccurate because of different variations of Greek language and everything else, and why would the Greeks be born about themselves and things like that. What do with Latin? It's hilarious, bizarre speech he has. And Folds has a lot of those speeches. There's a lot of things where he has to be the more difficult part of the conversation as being the guy who's learning something and being interested in learning it, but making sure you understand this is complicated. He would not know this. And that's why he has to be told this. And that's the most difficult part in the triangle in lots of ways. Because other people are actually showing how smart they are or how weak they are in Hacker's case. But he's actually having to learn and be taught that stuff. So you get a lot of other characters like Sir Arnold, who's the civil service head for the VS Minister show. And he's wonderfully sneering. You've got Weasel, who's the political advisor for the first series, who's just like so political that he's insane. You have Hacker's wife, who's like the logical point that Hacker always kind of never seemed to listen to, because Hacker's so vain. You know, you've got all these characters. Richard Vernon pops up every so often as his lead banker. So Desmond Glazebrook, who's such a moron in a way that you think is actually really credible. The one funny thing was David Cameron, one of our useless prime ministers, said when he saw the show he thought it was funny. He thought, there's no way this would work. That's not how government works. And then when he became prime minister, he realised this is exactly how government works, this show. It's exactly accurate. It's totally how it works. So that was a bit of a surprise for him. So yeah, watch this show. It's wonderful. If you've not seen it, watch it. It's great. And if you have seen it, watch it again. It's even better than you remember it being. So that's me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Go enjoy this show. It's wonderful. Right, bye.